Imagine this. You invest your hard-earned money, trusting it will grow over time, only to discover it was all a lie. This is the story of Bernie Madoff, a man who promised wealth and security, but instead orchestrated one of the most notorious financial frauds in history, stealing an estimated $60 billion. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in 1938 in Queens, New York. A graduate of Hofstra University, he started his own investment firm in 1960. At first, he was a success story, a pioneer in electronic trading. But behind that success lurked a dark secret. Madoff was a respected figure. He served as chairman of NASDAQ. No one suspected that beneath the surface, he was running a massive Ponzi scheme. So, what is a Ponzi scheme? It's a fraudulent investment scam that pays returns to earlier investors with the capital of newer investors, rather than from profit earned. Madoff promised his clients consistent, high returns, something that should have raised red flags. As a financial expert said, Madoff's returns were too good to be true. In a normal market, you don't see steady returns like that. It was a classic case of, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Over decades, Madoff attracted thousands of investors, individuals, charities, even hedge funds. Lured by the promise of wealth, his charm and reputation masked the fraud. But Madoff's deception wasn't just about numbers. It was about manipulating people's trust, playing on their desire for exclusivity, and exploiting the gaps in the financial system. As a former investor stated, "I was captivated by Madoff. He seemed so genuine. I trusted him completely. It wasn't just about the returns. He made you feel like you were part of an exclusive club. He had a way of speaking, calm, confident, that put you at ease. And he never seemed rushed or pressured. Madoff's greatest asset wasn't just his firm or the promises he made. It was his image. He had the rare ability to weave a narrative of exclusivity, creating an aura of legitimacy that shielded him from scrutiny. He surrounded himself with people who had status and power, often speaking at prestigious events, building relationships with the wealthy elite. This network of influence helped him deflect suspicion. If you were in the circle, you were in the know. And who would question the legitimacy of someone with that kind of pedigree? Madoff's success was built on secrecy. He deliberately kept a low profile when it came to the mechanics of his investments. It was part of his pitch. He made it sound like his operation was so sophisticated that only a select few could understand it. His firm was closed to new investors. That added to the mystique. But it was a calculated move to make people feel privileged to be included. While the world outside marveled at his success, Madoff ran his operations with a meticulous level of secrecy. Few knew the inner workings of his firm. The very design of his operation helped keep the fraud under wraps. He used paper statements to keep clients in the dark, and for years, no one questioned the consistency of his returns. A former employee said, "People didn't ask questions. It was a different kind of culture." Madoff was at the top, and he had the trust of everyone. If you worked there, you knew things weren't normal, but you didn't question it. It was a cult of personality. He was the king, and everyone followed the script. In 2008, the financial world was rocked by the most severe global recession since the Great Depression. The stock market plummeted, home prices collapsed, and banks teetered on the brink of collapse. For many investors, it was a time of intense anxiety as the value of their portfolios shrank. But for Bernie Madoff, it was the beginning of the end. The 2008 crisis was the perfect storm for Madoff. For years, he had been able to pay out returns to investors by bringing in new money, but the global market collapse dried up the flow of new investors. People wanted to withdraw their money, but Madoff didn't have it to give. The facade he'd built was crumbling. As the financial markets sank, many of Madoff's clients, fearing further losses, began to demand withdrawals. But Madoff had nothing left to pay them. For years, he had been using new investors' money to pay returns to old ones, an unsustainable system that was now collapsing under the weight of the crisis. When the market crashed, investors who had been receiving steady returns for years suddenly wanted their money back. Madoff couldn't produce the funds. The illusion that his operation was legitimate began to unravel. But he wasn't prepared to admit the truth. Instead, he began to make excuses, telling clients to wait, assuring them the market would bounce back soon. Despite the mounting pressure, Madoff continued to live a life of extraordinary luxury, unfazed by the looming crisis. His wealth, the yachts, the expensive homes, the private jets, all were funded by money stolen from his investors. To those on the outside, he was still the respected financier, the man who had built an empire. But behind closed doors, his empire was built on lies. A former investor said, "I remember calling Madoff's firm, asking to withdraw my funds. They kept telling me that they were holding everything up until the market stabilized. But something felt off. I had a gut feeling that things weren't right." The situation became increasingly dire as the financial crisis deepened. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 sent shockwaves through the global economy, and the pressure on Madoff intensified. The cracks in his operation were impossible to ignore. His clients were desperate to get their money out, and the media was beginning to ask questions. Madoff had always been a figure who operated in the shadows. But when the market crashed, people started digging deeper. There were whispers. People started questioning the way he was operating, and that's when the walls began to close in on him. As his clients grew more anxious, Madoff's firm was besieged by calls. Desperate investors demanded their money, and it was clear that Madoff was running out of time. But he refused to admit defeat. Instead, he doubled down, creating more elaborate excuses and trying to stall for time, all while knowing that the scheme was about to collapse completely. A former employee stated, "There was a moment when I knew it was over. I overheard Madoff talking to his sons, and you could see it in his face. He was terrified. He knew the game was up. We all did, really. But he still tried to hold it together for as long as possible." On December 10th, 2008, Bernie Madoff finally confessed to his sons, Mark and Andrew, revealing the full extent of the fraud. Devastated, they immediately contacted authorities. The man who had built a global empire of lies was finally caught. Within hours, Madoff was arrested. The scale of the deception began to unfold, and the world was shocked by the revelation that Bernie Madoff had been running a Ponzi scheme for decades. The figure who had once been revered as a financial genius was now exposed as one of history's most prolific criminals. The fallout was catastrophic. Thousands of investors lost their life savings, charities collapsed, and the trust in financial markets was shattered. Many people were left homeless, struggling to make ends meet. It was devastating. In March 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 felonies, including securities fraud. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, a stark reminder that crime doesn't pay. Madoff's case exposed major flaws in regulatory systems. It prompted reforms aimed at preventing future fraud. Bernie Madoff's story is a chilling reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. In a world where trust is paramount, his actions shattered lives and left an indelible mark on the financial landscape.